Most men over 70 won't say this out loud, but they feel it every night. Not grief exactly, not anger. Something quieter than both of those. Something that sits in the chest like a stone that never quite gets warm. I divorced at 58. At the time, I thought I was making the bravest decision of my life. My marriage had been difficult for years. We both knew it. And I told myself that starting over was something a man was still allowed to do at that age. I told myself the children were grown, that no one would be truly damaged, that two people living in polite misery were doing each other no favors. I had reasons, good ones, I thought, and I walked away feeling something close to relief. That was 12 years ago, and I want to tell you what 12 years of that relief actually looks like, because nobody told me. Nobody sits you down and describes the specific texture of the life that's waiting on the other side of that decision. They talk about freedom, about rediscovering yourself, about the second half being the best half. What they don't tell you is what Sunday afternoon feels like in a quiet apartment when you're 71 years old and there is nowhere you are particularly expected to be. I'm not saying I made the wrong choice. I'm not even sure that's the right question anymore. What I'm saying is that I didn't understand what I was trading. I understood what I was leaving. I did not understand what leaving it would cost me. Over time, in ways that don't show up immediately. In ways that accumulate so slowly you almost don't notice until one day you're sitting in a doctor's waiting room, alone, and you realize no one will ask you tonight how it went. That's the thing nobody prepares you for. Not the loneliness in the abstract sense, because men my age have heard about loneliness. We've been warned about it in articles and well-meaning conversations. I'm talking about something more specific than loneliness. I'm talking about the loss of being known. My ex-wife knew how I took my coffee. She knew which silences meant I was worried and which meant I was just tired. She knew the names of people from my childhood, knew the stories behind the scar on my hand, knew what kind of day would make me difficult to be around and why. That knowledge doesn't transfer. You can't hand it to someone new and say, "Here, this is who I am, now you know me." It takes years to build, decades sometimes, and when the marriage ended, all of that went with it. Not to her, not stored somewhere safely, just gone. My son calls on Sundays. He's good about that, I'll give him that. My daughter visits when she can, which means 4 or 5 times a year, and I'm grateful for it, I truly am. But there is a particular kind of presence that a shared life provides. A person who is simply there, not visiting, not scheduled, just there in the ordinary, unremarkable dailiness of things. And once you've lived without that for long enough, you understand it was never ordinary at all. I started noticing it most at meals. I know that sounds small, but I would cook something, nothing elaborate, just a proper meal the way I'd always liked to eat. And I would sit down at the table, and there was no one to tell that it had turned out well. No one to complain to if it hadn't. No one to sit across from in that comfortable half silence where nothing needs to be said because the other person is simply there. I started eating in front of the television. Most men my age do. We tell ourselves it's a preference. I'm not sure it is. There were years, I want to be honest about this, when I thought I would find someone else. I dated. I was not bad at it, or at least not as bad as I feared. There were women I liked, women who were kind and interesting and who seemed to like me in return. But I was 60, 62, 64, and the project of building a shared life from nothing felt enormous, in a way it hadn't at 30. At 30, you have time and energy and a certain unconscious confidence that things will sort themselves out. At 63, you are aware of how much sorting is actually required, and you are also aware, in a way you weren't at 30, of what you might lose again if it doesn't work. So you hold back a little, and holding back means it doesn't grow. And eventually, you are 7-0, and you have stopped trying. And you're not entirely sure when that happened. I think about my father sometimes. He stayed in his marriage, a hard one, not warm, not easy, but he stayed. He died at 79 with my mother sitting beside him, and I used to think that was sad in its own way, that he had accepted so little. Now I wonder if he understood something I didn't. Not that staying is always right, not that unhappy marriages should be endured for the sake of enduring them, but that was what he had, even imperfect, even worn down by years, was still a form of companionship that nothing else quite replaces. Someone who was his, someone he was accountable to, and who was accountable to him, in the quiet, daily way that doesn't feel like love until it's absent. The regret I carry is not the dramatic kind. It's not sharp. It doesn't arrive with clarity or with a clear memory attached to it. It arrives in the late evenings, when the apartment is exactly as I left it that morning, when nothing has moved or changed or been disturbed by another person's presence. It arrives when I'm ill, and I have to arrange my own care, drive myself, pick up my own prescription, and report back to no one. It arrives at my granddaughter's birthday parties when I watch my children with their spouses, and I understand, in a way I can only understand now, what that structure actually does for a person, not just emotionally, but practically, existentially, in terms of simply having a place in the world. I am not a miserable man. I want to be clear about that. I have a life I'm grateful for, friendships, work I still do some of, a mind that still functions, and grandchildren I love beyond measure. I'm not asking for pity, and I'm not wallowing. I'm telling you something true because I think it matters. After all, I think men my age tend not to say it, and because I think younger men deserve to hear it from someone who is living with the consequences of choices they haven't made yet. What I would tell my 55-year-old self is not to stay, no matter what. It's not that simple, and I know it's not that simple. What I would tell him is to understand what he's holding before he puts it down. To sit with the question not just of what his life would gain, but of what it would become, years out, when the freedom has settled into routine,
and the routine has settled into silence. To ask himself what 72 looks like, not 62, not in the first flush of a new beginning, but 72 on a Tuesday in November with nowhere particular to be. I don't think most men ask that question. I didn't. And I think that is the quiet, undramatic, entirely ordinary tragedy of it. Not a catastrophe, not a ruined life. Just a man sitting in a room that is exactly as he left it, wondering, in no particular direction, what the evening might have sounded like if things had gone differently.